I'll start with the dynamic ads, and then I'll just go into the metrics part. So dynamic ads are really, really helpful if you have content that is evergreen, where a lot of people are coming into your show and downloading old episodes. And I get that that's going to be the case here with the podcast that you described, which is about ADD, ADHD. You'll have professionals on to talk about subjects, but a lot of people, and I had the stat here, it's 47% of all podcasts are actually old episodes that get downloaded. Maybe it's not yours. I mean, if you do a podcast about the Buffalo Bills, you're only going to want to hear about that story for about 2 days and put that away till next fall. And I'm glad I worked that one in. But sports podcasts, they only last about 3 days. So dynamic ad insertion is not necessarily the best thing. But when you do have content and it's evergreen and people are going right back to the beginning, it's a good idea to maybe look into getting some dynamic ads. That way, if you have an advertiser, if they go to download episode 2, they're going to get the current ad in there. And I also want to be careful not to say that it's advertising, because it doesn't have to be advertising that you can put in there. It could be dynamic content. So if you have a message that you need to deliver to your audience, such as sign up for our new newsletter, we've just started a Patreon. We're going to be hosting an event at a certain place. Use that ad spot to really promote your own items and your own wares, whether it's to sign up for the newsletter. I think a newsletter is a very important way to keep up with your listeners. So when people talk about dynamic ads, you own that inventory. Make sure that it's your content that goes in first. Maybe you've got a product to sell, or maybe you have a partner that you've partnered up with to maybe move a product or to connect with listeners. You're going to make the monetization part. You're always going to make the most money with advertising and podcasting if you do the deal yourself. There are things, I have no experience with AdvertiseCast, but I know that Libsyn has, they're about a year into it now. And I think we're looking for some solutions. They're we're kind of in a great spot here, but I think their goal is to really, is to use your unused inventory. To the spots that you're not using, they're willing to compensate you for it. It's not very big. And I don't know what it is. I was working with Spotify. They claim it's a $17 CPM. So what that means, it's like you get $17 for every 1,000 times the ad plays. That's good for a cup of coffee, maybe, for microphone repair. I don't know, maybe a beer. I don't think we're going to be able to get a car payment out of it. So generally, a lot of these companies are really there. They want to come in and they'll sell some of your, inventory that's sitting about. But the reason why you do get into dynamic ad insertion is to promote your own assets. I have a podcast about radio. I would promote my voiceover business in it first and foremost. So I guess that's the long and the quick of the dynamic ad insertion, and an answer that I hope I answered the question for you. Okay, so by the way, Jag did point out headliner.app was another great place to get some audiograms. They've just added transcription into the bundle. It's a little bit on the pricey side. I think I paid $240 for the year, but transcripts are now available in there, and I thought that was rather nice. We also touched a little bit on SEO earlier. I wanted to just mention that a lot of apps are really beginning to gravitate to your title field. So do not have episode number 5 or 10 or 20 in there. Take that out, because you are affecting search for a number of apps by having the words episode and number in there. I'm here to talk to you about metrics. I won't bore you too much with them, but I know we're all fascinated by them. So I want to debunk just a few things about them. The metric used in podcasting is downloads. It's never streams. Even though people may say it's streams or we're now streaming, podcasting, there's no streaming in podcasting. Same way there's no crying in baseball. It's downloads is really the number that we look at. Your podcast host does provide very good metrics somehow in the back. Some are more detailed than others. Libsyn has very detailed numbers. Anchor, not so much, but most of them will give you some numbers. And really that data is drawn by two things: the IP address of where the podcast was listened to, and the user agent. So from the IP address, you can get things like the location, maybe you downloaded it in Canada or the United States, right down, maybe it was in Boston or Detroit. And the user agent, well, it was on a Chrome. It was a Chrome browser. No, wait, it was an Apple phone. It was We use the Overcast app. So these are some of the ways that you can sort of see how people are consuming your podcast. It's very important, I think, to know how they're doing it. So always go in and take a look at this stuff. Where people get hung up, and I find myself, I'm not a therapist, but I find myself playing one, talking to podcasters going, I need more downloads. And I think the question is, well, what is, a good number of downloads? Well, it really depends what you're talking about. If you're talking about the New England Patriots, that's going to be quite a popular podcast if you're going to be, marketing that in the Boston area. And you'll get a few downloads apparently in Detroit. If you're talking about basket weaving, that's going to be a little bit less. If you're talking about swimming, it's not going to be as popular. So you really got to look at your community and your audience, and really what's that worth. Envision, for instance, a conference. If you had a podcast about widgets, well, what's the widget conference look like? Is it how many people are in the room? What's going to be, how many people are going to show up for that? So, and maybe that's, it's not bad. Listen, if you had the opportunity, if you got 100 downloads and you had the opportunity to talk to 100 people every week, you would take that opportunity. But again, people still want to go a little bit further, and they want to find out exactly, okay, where do I rank? So this is some data that's from Libsyn. Rob and Elsie, who work at Libsyn, they share this information every once in a while. The number has changed actually a little bit, but if you get 128 downloads on your podcast, you're in the top 50%. You've actually surpassed, and that's after 30 days, by the way. You've actually surpassed half the podcasts that are out there. That's pretty good. So what's it take to get to top 20%? That would be 1,000 downloads after 30 days. And as you can see, the graph sort of, gets quite hefty from there, as it were. But again, you really should be thinking about your community and what's in that community. And listen, I know it's hard out there because people ask you, well, how many downloads do you have? And when somebody says, oh, I got 10,000 downloads, that doesn't mean anything. That just means, was that in a year? Was that in a week? Was that in a month? What is that? That's not really a complete metric. So when people ask you for that, if they say, how many do you get in 30 days or how many do you get in 90 days? That's a more realistic approach to finding out what your metrics are. In fact, the number I always sort of look at to see how a podcast is doing, I only look at the last 30 days and the last 90 days. Before that, not even sure. There's some other data that is hidden inside Apple and Spotify. So if you do get an opportunity to see your metrics inside either of these places, there are some portals that you can find out. They have consumption metrics. So this is not downloads. This is how much did people listen to your show. Apple and Spotify do compile this. Do understand, though, this is only your Apple audience. So, if you only have 40% of your audience is listening through Apple, this is the 40% that you have. And this is where you can see, where I was boring at the beginning, and in the middle, there was an ad that played and it dropped. And here's my second ad. And then I started to say goodbye, and then people left. And that's fairly realistic. I just happened to show this episode and wanted to also show that it was possible that the consumption could be over 100%. So in this case, this was so nice, some people decided to listen to it twice. But this data is available, although again, it depends how many downloads you have, but it's not the most complete. If you only have 7% Spotify downloads, it's not going to be as complete as you like. So take it all with a grain of salt. A good number for consumption is 80%, maybe 75, 70%. That's also pretty good. People got that far through it. They put the podcast down. They probably came back later. Maybe they listened to it on another device through another app. I know I find myself listening to podcasts through multiple apps. Apple charts, and this will be the last of this is a bit of a warning here about the person who says that we're number 2 on the whatever chart. Again, we're only measuring Apple users. Maybe you're popular on Spotify, which is actually becoming a very popular app to use. So, if you have Spotify, this chart, a lot of your listeners are not playing in this ballpark. I just wanted to brag that I'm number 1 on Apple Podcasts in Nigeria for performing arts, which is, this is big. I seem to have slayed a lot of podcast dragons here, but when you really think about, who this is for radio people in an English speaking country in Nigeria where Apple phones there's not many of them. It's about a 10%, only 10% of the population has it. And people in radio are really the ones who have them all. So, and I released this on a Sunday when all these other podcasts hadn't. So I got to number one, and I've kept this, and I'm feeling pretty proud of myself. So that's my little sort of like skim about downloads and metrics. You're doing better than you think. And, a lot of people are going to say, hey, how many downloads do you have? Especially if you ask for a guest, the guest wants to know how many downloads you have. Do not start to compare any of these metrics against Facebook impressions, Twitter impressions, YouTube, anything. These are physical downloads. They don't compare against any of the other social media junk out there. So don't get into it with trying to run these numbers up against Facebook and not think you're getting any ROI.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions for Matt? Did I miss any? Joyce, please unmute yourself, and you're on the air.
Thank you. That's really useful. So I am a sponsored podcast, and for years, like Dave could tell me, I'm like, I don't know what people are buying. Like, I don't even know what the numbers they need. So I just been throwing numbers out there. But this idea that I am in the top 50%, I mean, that's all, I don't know the rest of it, but
you're also a niche, for sure. You're a niche podcast. I mean, you don't do a show just about cannabis. You do about the cannabis industry and women in the cannabis industry. So now we're talking more like basket weaving in a good way,
And this week we talked about sex and cannabis, and boy, Dave had quite an earful.
You guys have no idea. It was a lot of fun. I turned red several times.
Wait. Should I be taking up cannabis?
But that's like, those numbers are so useful, because I have a deck which just has like a random assortment of numbers from like Facebook, and like I've never really known what I'm selling, but this conversation has made it much easier for me to explain to people what they're getting.
Yeah, you don't want a mass audience. You want the right audience.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably going to be better down the road. A lot of advertisers are going to say, oh, how many women 25, 54 who smoke cannabis listen to your show? That sort of attribution is not available, because it's only an IP address and the user agent. That's all you have. It's because of privacy issues that you don't have access to that. Apple is not really in the business of giving that information back to people, and nor should they. But I know a lot of advertisers are gonna ask for it. There is a little bit of it in Spotify, because people have agreed to it. So if you do get into the Spotify for podcasters, you can sign up for an account and perhaps look for your podcast in there. It is a bit of a back portal, and not necessarily easy to do. I don't want to give people like jobs to do, but it is available.
Joyce, you might need me for that. I might need to log into your Spotify account.
Yeah. I mean, because I just don't have those numbers on my deck at all. I just have, I just put the numbers of 12,000 downloads. Like you said, people don't know what that means. They don't, how many episodes, it's, so this is a better.
And a lot of people listen, for you're selling, that works, do it. If it means money, do it. It doesn't have to be perfect, especially those Apple charts. Hey, you know what? If somebody wants to buy your show because you're number one in Nigeria, do it.
Right. Yeah.
But I want you to know that what goes into making this wonderful tasty sausage.